A 9-year-old girl rode her bicycle home from Oakwood Baptist Church on a sunny Sunday afternoon in 1995. Her small Bible tucked safely in the wicker basket, never knowing it would be the last time anyone would see her alive. But 12 years later, construction workers renovating an old community center would discover something that would change everything about what happened to Keisha Williams. The morning had started like every other Sunday in the Williams household on Birmingham's South Side. Keisha bounced out of bed at 7:30, her cornrows still neat from Saturday night's careful braiding session with Mama Ruth. She pulled on her favorite dress, the powder blue one with tiny white flowers that made her feel grown, her patent leather shoes that clicked satisfyingly against the hardwood floors. "Slow down, baby girl," Mama Ruth called from the kitchen, where bacon sizzled in the cast-iron skillet that had belonged to her own grandmother. "Church ain't going nowhere." Keisha grinned and slowed her steps, but only slightly. Sunday was her favorite day of the week. Not just because of the music that made her heart feel like it might burst, or the way Pastor Williams, no relation, though she always pretended they were cousins, told stories that painted pictures in her mind. Sunday was special because, afterward, Mama Ruth always let her ride her bike home alone while the grown-ups lingered on the church steps, talking about things that seemed important but never made much sense to a 9-year-old dot. The service that morning had been particularly moving. The choir had sung Amazing Grace with such power that even the teenagers in the back pew had stopped whispering. Keisha had clutched her small leather Bible gift from Mama Ruth for her 9th birthday and sang along, her clear soprano voice blending with the congregation's joyful noise. After the final blessing, she'd kissed Mama Ruth's powdered cheek and promised to ride straight home, no detours, no stops to talk to friends. The same promise she made every Sunday, and the same promise she always kept. Keisha secured her Bible in the wicker basket attached to her handlebars. The pink and white streamers Mama Ruth had tied there fluttering in the gentle breeze. She waved to the familiar faces still gathered outside the red brick church, pushed off with her right foot, and pedaled into the Birmingham sunshine. She was 3 blocks from home when the white van pulled. Alongside her, the sledgehammer hit the interior wall of the old East Side Community Center with a satisfying crack, sending chunks of plaster and decades of dust cascading to the floor. Marcus Thompson wiped sweat from his forehead and surveyed the progress his crew had made since dawn. The building had sat empty for 8 years, a victim of budget cuts and shifting neighborhood demographics, but the city had finally approved funds for a complete renovation. "This whole section's coming down easy," called out Jake Martinez, one of his younger workers, as he pried loose strips of rotted wood paneling. Whoever built this place back in the day didn't believe in solid construction. Marcus nodded, remembering his grandfather's stories about buildings from the 1960s when speed mattered more than longevity. The community center had served Birmingham's South Side for over 40 years, hosting everything from youth basketball leagues to senior citizen meal programs. Now, it would get a second life as a modern facility with updated wiring, fresh paint, and central air conditioning that actually worked. "Boss, you need to see this." Jake's voice had changed, losing its casual tone. Marcus set down his sledgehammer and walked over to where Jake stood frozen, staring at a gap in the wall he'd just opened up. Behind the paneling, tucked into a space between the studs, was a small object wrapped in what appeared to be a plastic bag. "Don't touch it," Marcus said automatically, his mind already racing through possibilities. In 23 years of construction work, he'd found everything from love letters to whiskey bottles hidden in walls, but something about Jake's expression told him this was different. The plastic bag was yellowed with age, but still intact. Through the cloudy material, Marcus could make out the shape of a book, a small book with what looked like gold lettering on a dark cover. "That's a Bible," Jake whispered. Why would someone hide a Bible in a wall? Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed the number for the construction supervisor. As the phone rang, he kept staring at the hidden book, a chill running down his spine, despite the Alabama heat. The community center had been built in 1963, but this section had been renovated in the mid-1990s. Someone had deliberately placed this item behind the wall during construction, meant to stay hidden. When the supervisor answered, Marcus spoke. "Carefully, we found something unusual in the demolition. I think we need to call the police." Diane Williams was folding laundry in the same house where she'd waited 12 years for a phone call that never came. When Detective Sarah Chen finally called with news that would shatter the careful routine she'd built around her grief, the detective's voice was gentle but direct, the kind of professional compassion that came from years of delivering life-changing news to families who had already lost everything. "Mrs. Williams, this is Detective Chen with Birmingham PD. Found something that may be related to Keisha's case." Diane's hands stilled on the small pink t-shirt she'd been folding, one of dozens she'd bought over the years in sizes Keisha would never wear. A ritual that kept hope alive even when logic said otherwise. At 39, Diane had aged in ways that couldn't be measured in years alone. The laugh lines around her eyes had deepened into permanent creases of worry, and silver threads ran through the black hair she'd stopped bothering to dye. "Kind of something?" she asked, setting the shirt down with trembling fingers. "Construction workers found a Bible hidden behind a wall at the old Eastside Community Center. We believe it may have belonged to your daughter." The room seemed to tilt. Diane gripped the edge of the folding table, her knees threatening to buckle. Keisha's Bible, the small, leather-bound King James version that Mama Ruth had given her for her 9th birthday, the one she'd carried in her bicycle basket that last Sunday. "How do you know it's hers?" "There's an inscription inside the front cover. It says, 'To my precious granddaughter Keisha, may God's word light your path always. Love, Mama Ruth.'" April 15th, 1995. Diane closed her eyes, remembering that birthday morning. Keisha had been so proud of that Bible, reading verses aloud at the breakfast table, carrying it everywhere for weeks until the novelty settled into reverent routine. "Mrs. Williams, I'd like to come by and speak with you in person, if that's all right. There are some details about where and how it was found that we need to discuss." "Yes," Diane whispered, then cleared her throat and tried again. "Yes, please come." After hanging up, she stood in the middle of the living room that had become a shrine to her missing daughter. School photos lined the mantel, frozen moments of a 9-year-old's smile. The bicycle helmet Keisha never got to where home still sat. On the bookshelf dot, for 12 years, Diane had lived suspended between hope and despair. Now, with Keisha's Bible found hidden behind a wall, that terrible balance was about to shift. The Birmingham Police Department's evidence room smelled of dust and disinfectant, a sterile environment where hope and horror were cataloged with equal precision. Diane sat beside Detective Chen at a metal table, watching Dr. Amanda Foster carefully examine Keisha's Bible under bright fluorescent lights. The forensics expert wore latex gloves that made soft, squeaking sounds as she turned each page with tweezers. "The leather cover shows significant wear," Dr. Foster observed, her voice clinical and measured, "consistent with regular handling over several months. The binding is intact, which suggests it was well cared for before being concealed." Diane leaned forward, recognizing the small water stain on the back cover from the time Keisha had accidentally knocked over her glass at Sunday dinner. Such a small detail, but it confirmed what her heart already knew: this was her daughter's Bible, the one that had disappeared with her 12 years ago. Detective Chen made notes in a leather-bound pad. Any fingerprints recoverable after all this time? Several partial prints on the cover, but they're degraded. I'll run them through the system, though I'm not optimistic. Dr. Foster paused as she reached a section near the middle of the book. "This is interesting. There are additional markings here that don't appear to be from the original owner." Diane's breath caught. "What kind of markings?" Dr. Foster angled the Bible so they could see. In the margins of several pages, someone had written notes in pencil. The handwriting was different from the careful script Keisha had been learning in 3rd grade. This was adult handwriting, angular and deliberate. "She is chosen," Detective Chen read aloud from one notation. "The Lord provides for his faithful servants." More notes appeared as Dr. Foster continued turning pages. Biblical verses had been underlined, and in some cases, words had been circled or connected with thin pencil lines. In the book of Samuel, someone had written, "Delivered from the wicked," next to the story of David hiding in caves. "This isn't random," Dr. Foster said, photographing each marked page. "There's a pattern here. Someone was using this Bible to document or justify something." Diane felt ice forming in her stomach. Justify what? Detective Chen and Dr. Foster exchanged glances. The forensics expert turned to another section where the margins contained what appeared to be dates and locations. written in the same angular handwriting. "Mrs. Williams," Detective Chen said gently, "we're going to need to analyze these notations more thoroughly. This suggests your daughter's disappearance may have been part of something larger." The afternoon heat shimmered off the pavement as Detective Chen walked the perimeter of the old community center, noting which houses had clear sight lines to the building and which residents might have witnessed unusual activity during the mid-1990s renovation. The neighborhood had changed little in 12 years' modest homes with small front yards, children's bicycles leaning against porch railings, the kind of community where people noticed strangers. "That's Willie Jefferson's place," said Mrs. Ernestine Jackson, pointing to a pale greenhouse directly across from the community center. At 73, she had lived on the block for 42 years and possessed the kind of memory that came from decades of watching the neighborhood from her front porch swing. He's been the caretaker for the center since they renovated it back in '95. Detective Chen made a note. Willie Jefferson had not been mentioned in the original missing persons report, but caretakers often had access to buildings during construction phases. "What can you tell me about Mr. Jefferson?" Mrs. Jackson's expression grew guarded. "He's quiet, keeps to himself mostly. Always been helpful when folks needed the community center open for events or meetings." She paused, rocking slightly in her chair. "All hours, late nights, early mornings. Sometimes on weekends. I used to think maybe he was just thorough about his job," but she trailed off, glancing toward Willie's house where a weathered pickup truck sat in the driveway. Detective Chen followed her gaze. "But what, Mrs. Jackson?" "Well, there was that time during the renovation when I saw him carrying things into the building, heavy things that took 2 trips from his truck. This was after the workers had gone home for the day." She adjusted her glasses. "I remember because it was around the time that little Williams girl went missing. The whole neighborhood was on edge, everybody watching everybody else." The front door of Willie's house opened, and a thin man in his 50s emerged, moving with the careful steps of someone who had noticed the detective's presence. Willie Jefferson had graying hair and the kind of lined face that came from years of outdoor work, but his eyes were sharp and alert as he approached the property line. "Afternoon, officer," he called out, his voice carrying a note of forced casualness. "Anything I can help you with?" Detective Chen studied his posture, the way his hands remained in his pockets, the slight tremor in his voice, despite his attempt at nonchalance. "Actually, Mr. Jefferson, yes, I'd like to ask you a few questions. About the community center." Diane's fingers trembled as she typed an update into the Missing Children's Network forum, the online community that had become her lifeline over the past decade. The computer screen cast a blue glow across her face in the darkened living room, where she'd spent countless nights searching for any trace of information about Keisha's disappearance. Police found Keisha's Bible hidden in a wall at the old community center. She wrote to the group of parents who understood her pain in ways that even well-meaning friends and family could not. "After 12 years, we finally have a real lead. They're investigating a man named Willie Jefferson who had access to the building during renovation. Please keep us in your prayers." The responses came quickly. Messages of support and hope from mothers and fathers across the country who had lived with the same hollow ache in their chests. Diana, 7823 from Oregon, wrote, "This could be the break you've been waiting for." Todd's mom from Florida added, "I'm praying for answers, honey. Stay strong." Diane was reading through the replies when a new private message notification appeared in her inbox. The sender's username was unfamiliar, Silent Watcher, 1995. She clicked on it, expecting another message of support from someone who preferred to reach out privately. Instead, her blood turned to ice. "Stop digging, or you'll find more than you bargained for. Some children are better off forgotten." The Bible should have stayed buried. Below the text was an attachment, a photograph that made Diane's hands fly to cover her mouth. It was a picture of her own house, taken from across the street, showing her silhouette in the living room window where she sat right now. The timestamp indicated it had been taken less than an hour ago. Diane jumped up from her chair, rushing to the window and yanking the curtains closed. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she grabbed her phone to call Detective Chen, but stopped when she noticed another message had appeared in her inbox. "Your daughter learned to be quiet. You should too." The username showed as deleted when she tried to click on the sender's profile. Whoever had sent the messages had created the account solely to threaten her. then disappeared back into the digital shadows. Diane's initial terror began crystallizing into something else: fierce determination. For 12 years, she had lived with uncertainty, clinging to hope while fearing the worst. Now someone was actively trying to silence her, which meant they had something to hide. She screenshot both messages and called Detective Chen. If someone wanted her to stop searching for the truth about Keisha, it meant the truth was finally within reach. Diane sat in her car across from Willie Jefferson's house for the third consecutive morning, a thermos of coffee growing cold in her lap and a notebook filled with his movements spread across the passenger seat. Detective Chen had advised her to stay away from the investigation, but 12 years of waiting had taught Diane that sometimes the only person who would fight for Keisha was herself. Willie's routine was predictable. Every morning at 7:15, he emerged from his pale green house carrying a lunch cooler and toolbox, climbed into his weathered pickup truck, and drove the same route to his current job site at a middle school renovation project. But yesterday had been different. Yesterday, Willie had made an unscheduled stop at a storage facility on the outskirts of Birmingham, spending nearly an hour inside Unit 247 before emerging empty-handed but visibly agitated. Diane had followed from a safe distance, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she watched him pace outside the metal door. Checking his phone repeatedly, now she waited again, hoping to understand what had made Willie so nervous. The threatening messages had stopped coming, but the silence felt more ominous than the words themselves. Someone wanted her to quit searching, which meant her search was getting close to something they desperately wanted to keep hidden. Willie's front door opened, but instead of his usual work clothes, he wore dark jeans and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He moved quickly to his truck, glancing repeatedly over his shoulder as if sensing he was being watched. Diane started her engine and followed at a distance as Willie drove through Birmingham's morning traffic. Instead of heading toward the school, where he was supposed to be working, he took the highway north toward the storage facility. Her pulse quickened. Whatever was in Unit 247, Willie felt compelled to check on it again. By overgrown fields and abandoned lots, Diane parked behind a cluster of pine trees where she could observe the entrance while remaining hidden. She watched Willie punch in the access code and drive through the security gate, his truck disappearing among the rows of identical metal buildings. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. When Willie finally emerged, he was carrying a large black garbage bag that he loaded carefully into the bed of his truck. Even from a distance, Diane could see his hands shaking as he secured the bag with bungee cords. As Willie drove past her hiding spot, Diane made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out what was in Unit 247. The digital clock on Diane's dashboard glowed to 47 a.m. as she sat parked 3 blocks from Willie Jefferson's house, her car hidden beneath the drooping branches of an ancient oak tree. Sleep had become impossible since the threatening messages began, and tonight an inexplicable restlessness had driven her from her bed to resume her surveillance. Something was about to happen. She could feel it in the humid Alabama air that pressed against her windows. A light flickered on in Willie's backyard, barely visible through the chain-link fence that separated his property from the alley behind it. Diane grabbed the small binoculars she'd bought at a pawn shop and focused on the pale, yellow glow emanating from what appeared to be a small fire. Willie emerged from his back door, carrying an armload of papers and what looked like several manila folders. Even from this distance, Diane could see the nervous energy in his movements as he fed documents into the flames one by one, stopping frequently to look over his shoulder toward the street. The fire cast dancing shadows across his face, making his features look grotesque and unfamiliar. Diane's hands tightened on the binoculars as she watched him burn what could be evidence of Keisha's disappearance. Each page that curled and blackened in the flames might contain answers she'd been searching for over 12 years. She fumbled for her phone to call Detective Chen, but hesitated by the time police arrived. Everything would be AShdOT instead. She quietly opened her car door and began moving closer, staying in the shadows of the neighboring houses. The acrid smell of burning paper mixed with something else, something chemical and sharp, that made her nose burn. Willie wasn't just destroying documents. He was using accelerant to ensure nothing remained readable. From her new position behind a tool shed 2 yards away, Diane could see Willie more clearly. His face was streaked with sweat despite the cool night air, and his hands shook as he fed photograph after photograph into the hungry flames. In the brief moments before each image was consumed, Diane caught glimpses of what appeared to be young girls with dark skin and bright smiles. Stick cracked under her foot. Willie's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the darkness around him. Diane pressed herself against the shed, hardly daring to breathe as he stood frozen beside the fire, listening. After what felt like an eternity, he returned to his task, but now he moved with frantic urgency, dumping entire folders into the flames at once. When the last of the papers had been consumed, Willie doused the fire and disappeared into his house, leaving Diane alone in the darkness with the terrible knowledge of what she'd witnessed. The SWAT team moved through Willie Jefferson's house like shadows in tactical gear, their boots silent on the hardwood floors as they cleared each room with methodical precision. Detective Chen stood in the front yard beside Diane, both women watching through the windows as flashlight beams swept across the interior of the pale green house that had hidden its secrets for 12 years. "Upstairs clear," came the voice through Chen's radio. Moving to basement level, Diane's heart hammered against her ribs. After calling Detective Chen at 3 a.m. to report Willie's document burning, everything had moved with startling speed. The storage unit had been raided at dawn, revealing disturbing photographs and journals that provided enough evidence for a search warrant. Now, as the sun climbed higher over Birmingham, they were finally inside the house that might hold answers about Keisha's fate. Detective Chen, the voice on the radio, was different now, tight with controlled urgency. "You need to get down here. Basement. Bring the mother." Diane's legs nearly gave way. Detective Chen caught her arm, steadying her as they moved toward the house. "Whatever we find in there, Mrs. Williams, you don't have to," interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. "I've waited 12 years. I'm not stopping now." They descended narrow wooden stairs into a basement that should have been ordinary concrete walls, exposed pipes, the usual clutter of a lifetime. Instead, they found a horror that would haunt Diane's dreams forever. The basement had been divided into sections by heavy curtains and makeshift walls. In the far corner, someone had constructed what could only be described as cells, small rooms with reinforced doors and tiny windows near the ceiling. "My God," Detective Chen whispered. The SWAT team leader approached them, his face grim behind his tactical mask. "We found evidence of recent occupation. Bedding, personal items, food containers. The locks on these doors are all electronic, controlled from upstairs." Diane stepped closer to one of the cells, her hand trembling as she touched the cold metal door. Inside, she could see a narrow bed, a small table, and walls covered with what appeared to be children's drawings. On the table sat a collection of small objects: hair ribbons, a broken bracelet, a stuffed animal worn soft with handling. "Where are they?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Where are the children who were kept down here?" Detective Chen was already speaking into her radio, coordinating with officers who were pursuing Willie Jefferson. He had fled sometime during the night, probably right after Diane had called in her report of the document burning. "We'll find him," Detective Chen promised, but her eyes remained fixed on the makeshift prison that had operated beneath their investigation for days. The ambulance sirens cut through the Birmingham morning like prayers being answered, carrying 3 young women toward University of Alabama Hospital, while Detective Chen's voice crackled over the radio with news that would change everything. Willie Jefferson had been found at an abandoned warehouse on the city's east side, along with the 3 victims he'd been preparing to transport when Diane's investigation had forced his hand. Diane sat in the passenger seat of Detective Chen's cruiser, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Are you sure one of them is Keisha? Are you absolutely certain?" "The paramedics confirmed it," Detective Chen said, taking the corner toward the hospital faster than the speed limit allowed. 21 years old, African-American female, responds to the name Keisha. She asked for her mama. The words hit Diane like a physical blow. After 12 years of wondering if her daughter was alive or dead, of imagining the worst while clinging to impossible hope, Keisha was breathing and speaking and asking for her. The child who had ridden away on her bicycle that sunny Sunday afternoon had somehow survived whatever hell Willie Jefferson had created at the hospital. Medical staff moved with controlled urgency, wheeling 3 gurneys through automatic doors. While calling out vital signs and medical instructions, Diane caught only a glimpse of the first stretcher, a young woman with Keisha's deep brown eyes and the same stubborn set to her jaw, though her face was gaunt and her hair hung limp around her shoulders. "She's severely malnourished but stable," Dr. Martinez told Diane as they stood outside the trauma bay. "All 3 women show signs of long-term captivity muscle atrophy, vitamin deficiencies, psychological trauma. But they're alive, Mrs. Williams. Against all odds, they're alive." Through the window, Diane could see Keisha lying on the hospital bed, her eyes closed but her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. She looked so small beneath the white hospital blankets, but she was undeniably the daughter Diane had lost 12 years ago, now grown into a young woman who had endured the unimaginable. "Can I see her? Can I talk to her? She's sedated, right? Now, but she's been asking for you," Dr. Martinez said gently. "The other 2 victims, Maria Santos and Jasmine Brooks, they've been telling us that Keisha helped keep them strong. She told them stories about her mama who would never stop looking for her." Diane pressed her hand against the glass, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her daughter alive, breathing. Home Keisha's voice was hoarse but steady as she sat in the hospital bed, her hand gripping Diane's with surprising strength. While Detective Chen recorded her testimony, at 21, she possessed a composure that spoke to years of surviving the unthinkable. But her eyes still held flashes of the 9-year-old who had disappeared on that Sunday afternoon. "He told us we were chosen," Keisha said, her gaze fixed on the Bible that lay on the bedside table, the same Bible that had been hidden in the community center wall. Willie said, "God had delivered us from families who didn't appreciate His gifts. He made us read Scripture every day, especially the parts about children honoring their parents." Diane squeezed her daughter's hand, fighting back tears as she listened to the twisted theology that had justified 12 years of captivity. "The basement had 3 rooms," Keisha continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Me, Maria, and Jasmine each had our own space, but Willie only let us be together during family time. That's what he called it, when he made us sit at his table upstairs and pretend we were grateful for his care." Detective Chen made careful notes. "Did he ever physically harm you?" "Not in the way you might think," Keisha said, glancing at her mother. "Willie believed he was saving us, so he saw punishment as correction. If we didn't read our Bible verses or thank him properly for meals, he'd make us kneel on rice for hours while reciting psalms." "What about the other girls? How did Maria and Jasmine come to be there?" Keisha's expression darkened. "Maria was taken when she was 10, about 3 years after me. Jasmine came when she was 8, maybe 5 years ago. Willie always said he was led to us by divine providence." She paused, her jaw tightening. "But I heard him on the phone sometimes talking to other people about moving us when we got too old. He said we'd outgrown our purpose." The implications of those words hung heavy in the hospital room. Detective Chen leaned forward gently. "Keisha, do you remember anything about the day you were taken? About how Willie approached you?" "He offered to show me kittens," Keisha said simply. "Said they were at the community center where he worked. I was riding my bike home from church, and She looked at Diane with 12 years of regret in her eyes. "I was curious about the kittens. I followed him." "You were 9 years old," Diane said firmly. "None of this was your fault." Keisha nodded slowly, then looked directly at Detective Chen. "Willie Jefferson stole 12 years of our lives. I want to make sure he never gets the chance to steal anyone else's." The verdict came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 13 months after construction workers had discovered Keisha's Bible hidden behind a wall. Willie Jefferson sat motionless as the judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms, without possibility of parole, his face showing no emotion even as the packed courtroom erupted in applause and tears of relief. Diane held Keisha's hand as they walked down the courthouse steps, surrounded by family, friends, and the media that had followed their story from the beginning. After months of testimony, psychological evaluations, and legal proceedings, justice had finally been served, but the real work of healing was just beginning. "I want to go to church," Keisha said quietly as they reached Diane's car. "I want to go home to Oakwood Baptist." The sanctuary looked exactly as Keisha remembered it from that last Sunday in 1995. The same red brick exterior, the same stained glass windows, casting colored light across wooden pews, the same feeling of sanctuary. that had drawn her there as a child. But now, at 22, she walked through those doors carrying the weight of experiences that had tested her faith in ways no 9-year-old should ever endure. Mama Ruth, now 85, and moving slowly with her walker, waited in the front pew where she had prayed for Keisha's return every Sunday for 13 years. When she saw her granddaughter walking down the aisle, tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. "My baby girl," she whispered as Keisha knelt beside her pew. "My precious child." Pastor Williams, the same pastor who had delivered that final sermon, Keisha had heard as a child approach the pulpit with tears in his eyes. "Today, we witness the miracle of faith rewarded," he said to the congregation that had never stopped hoping. "Today, we celebrate the return of our daughter." The choir began to sing Amazing Grace, the same hymn that had filled the sanctuary on that last Sunday in 1995. Keisha's voice joined theirs, clear and strong, carrying the testimony of someone who had truly been lost and found. Later, at the family home that Diane had maintained as both shrine and sanctuary, 3 generations of Williams women sat around the kitchen table, sharing stories and rebuilding the bonds that Willie Jefferson had tried to break. Keisha's Bible lay open between them, no longer evidence in a criminal case, but once again a source of comfort and strength. Outside, Birmingham continued its daily rhythm, but inside that modest house, a family had finally found its way back to wholeness. Faith, it seemed, had been worth the wait.